I never imagined a simple hotel reservation could become the worst night of my life. It all started a few months ago when a work trip forced me to spend the night in a city I barely knew. There weren't many options left, and the only available place was an old hotel on the outskirts, a building that looked like it had been forgotten by time. The facade was lit by two dim lamps, their weak glow barely cutting through the darkness. The sign above the entrance hung crooked, one side sagging as though ready to snap off in the wind. The street outside was silent, so silent that every step I took echoed unnaturally loud. When I stepped inside, the air hit me with a stench of damp wood and stale dust, like the smell of a cellar sealed shut for decades. The lobby was eerily empty, just a long counter and a chandelier dangling from the ceiling, its candles flickering faintly as if stirred by a draft I couldn't feel. There was no music, no murmur of guests, no signs of life at all, only the creaking of the wooden floor under my shoes. I tapped the little bell on the counter. The sound rang out sharp, then faded into silence that seemed to stretch for minutes. Finally, he appeared, a man in an old-fashioned uniform, the kind of bellhop attire you only see in sepia photographs. His jacket was buttoned to the throat, and his cap sat too neatly on his head. But what unsettled me most were his eyes, too bright, too pale, almost glowing. It was as though his gaze reflected the dim candlelight in a way no human eyes should. He greeted me with a dry, emotionless voice. "Welcome to the hotel." He handed me a heavy iron key, the number 313 carved into it. He didn't offer directions, didn't smile, didn't even blink. He just stood there, staring, as I walked away toward the elevator. The elevator was a rattling cage of iron, the kind you might expect in an old mine shaft rather than a hotel. It groaned and shook as it climbed, filling the silence with a screeching metallic whine. When it finally stopped, the doors opened onto a hallway bathed in shadows. A single chandelier flickered weakly overhead, its light barely reaching the floor. The corridor seemed endless. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if bouncing back from farther away than the walls allowed. Framed portraits lined the walls. Guests, families, couples, all painted in muted tones. But in each picture, standing somewhere in the background was the same figure, the bellhop, with those same unnatural eyes. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door to room 313. The moment it opened, a wave of icy air rushed out, cold enough to sting my skin. The room was tidy, perfectly arranged, yet something felt wrong. On the desk sat a small brass service bell, exactly like the one at the front desk. I set my bag down and tried to ignore it. Lying on the bed, I let my eyes close for only a moment. That's when I heard it, the sharp, metallic chime. The bell had rung. I snapped my eyes open, heart pounding against my ribs. The room was drenched in shadows, faintly lit by the weak, flickering glow from the hallway. For a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe the pipes, maybe the old wooden frame shifting. But I knew what I'd heard. That bell had rung. I stood, slowly, every nerve in my body alive with dread. The little brass bell sat perfectly still on the desk. I touched it with trembling fingers and instantly recoiled. It was ice cold. Colder than the air, colder than metal had any right to be. Then I heard it, a whisper, a soft, guttural murmur leaking from the far corner of the room. My skin crawled. I turned toward the sound, but the corner was empty, just wallpaper, peeling faintly with age. I forced myself to breathe. "You're just tired," I whispered. "It's in your head." But then my eyes fell on the mirror. A tall wardrobe stood against the wall, its mirrored doors reflecting the dim light. And in that reflection, I saw him, the bellhop. He stood directly behind me, eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. His expression was blank, but his gaze burned into me. My chest seized in panic. I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. The mirror, too, was empty. I didn't care what logic said. I wasn't staying in that room another second. I grabbed the iron key, shoved it into my pocket, and pulled the door open. The hallway outside was worse. The chandelier overhead swayed violently, though there was no draft, no wind. Its candles guttered, shadows stretching and warping across the walls. I stepped out cautiously, the thick carpet beneath my feet groaning like something alive. Then the sound came again. Ding. The bell. Not from my room this time, but from somewhere deeper down the hall. Ding. Another, answering the first. From the opposite direction. Ding. Ding. More and more of them, until the corridor rang with the echo of dozens of bells chiming in discord. My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, like wading through water. That's when I heard the footsteps. Behind me, slow, deliberate, almost soundless. I turned my head and saw him, the bellhop. He was gliding down the hall, not walking. His feet barely touched the ground, his pale eyes fixed on me. I bolted. My breath tore at my lungs as I sprinted down the endless corridor. Doors along the hallway began to creak open one by one. From each crack spilled whispers, faint laughter, the soft clinking of bells. I caught glimpses as I passed. Things I'll never forget. Inside one room, a family sat perfectly still around a dinner table, unmoving, their eyes wide open and glassy. Another room revealed a man hanging upside down, swaying gently like a pendulum, but smiling at me with broken teeth. And always, always the bells. I reached the elevator and slammed the gate shut. My hands shook as I yanked the lever, begging it to descend. The machinery groaned, but the cage didn't move. Then I felt it, a breath, cold and damp, against the back of my neck. The elevator shuddered, but it didn't move. My hands clutched the lever so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I didn't dare turn around. I could feel him there, his presence pressed against me, cold and suffocating, like standing in front of an open grave. Slowly, I forced myself to look. The bellhop was inside the cage with me. He hadn't opened the gate, hadn't entered the way a human would. He was simply there, inches from my face. His eyes glowed so fiercely, now they illuminated the inside of the elevator like two lanterns. His mouth twitched, then stretched into a faint smile. And then the elevator dropped. It plummeted downward with a screech that drowned out my scream. My body lifted from the floor, weightless for a second, before slamming back down as the cage rattled violently. The walls blurred past me in streaks of darkness. I expected it to crash, to end in a mangled heap of iron. But it didn't. The elevator slowed gently and came to a stop. The gate slid open by itself, revealing not the lobby, but another hallway. This one was different, longer, darker. The wallpaper peeled like rotting skin, and the carpet squirmed under my shoes as though alive. I stumbled out, too terrified to stay inside the cage with him. The gate slammed shut behind me, and when I spun back, the elevator was gone. Only a blank wall remained. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions. No windows, no exit signs, only door after door, each one identical. And from behind them, the sound of bells. Hundreds of them, chiming softly, mockingly, like a symphony of madness. I began walking, my breath short and shallow. Each step echoed strangely, as if the hallway swallowed sound. Then one door creaked open ahead of me. I froze. The bellhop stepped out. Not one, but two, then three, then more. Identical figures, spilling from the rooms in silence, their glowing eyes fixed on me. Their faces were the same, their movements synchronized, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. I ran. I don't know how long. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but the hallway never ended. The chandeliers above flickered and swung, raining dust and shadows. The bells rang louder and louder until they drowned out every thought. And then silence. I stopped. I was standing before a single door, different from the others. Old, cracked, with the number 313 carved into it. The same as my room. My hand shook uncontrollably as I reached for the knob. Before I could touch it, the door swung open on its own. Inside was the lobby. The same chandelier, the same desk, the same silence. And behind the counter stood the bellhop, staring at me with those eyes. He lifted a hand, motioning for me to come closer. I should have run. I should have screamed, but my feet moved on their own. I stepped forward, crossing the lobby until I stood before him. On the counter was the brass service bell. He nodded once, almost politely. My hand rose, trembling, and pressed it. Ding! The sound echoed endlessly as the lights went out.
Subscribe to Horror Stories.